The U.S. Joining me now in a Fox Business exclusive is former Republican Congressman, third-time presidential candidate, host of the Liberty Report, Dr. Ron Paul. Dr. Paul, thank you so much for the time. Thrilled to have you with us.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
I need to start on this heavier topic here. Senior U.S. officials are describing basically a nightmare scenario right now in Syria, saying we need one of two things: either clear policy from the U.S. that prevents Russia from bombing Syrians, or that the U.S. should send anti-aircraft missiles to confront Russian planes directly. Another presidential candidate, Donald Trump, says Russia's lack of respect for U.S. leadership is part of the problem.
Well, lack of respect. All it is lack of respect. He doesn't respect our president, and it's purely lack of respect. Putin's a liar, but Putin's leading, and Putin is somebody that people are respecting all over the world now, and our country is just the opposite. You get the respect. I mean, to a certain extent, you have it or you don't have it. You have that ability to get respect. You're a leader or you're not a leader.
So, Dr. Paul, is it a question of respect?
Well, I think there's a need for respect, but it depends on what you're respecting. I would respect all our leaders if we would mind our business more often. I'd respect our leaders and Obama a lot more if he hadn't declared 4 years ago that our policy was to get rid of Assad. And our goal was to get him out of the regime and change regimes. I don't have any respect for that. I have respect for people who stand up and say that it's in America's best interest to mind our own business and not go look for another fight. We've had Libya, we've had Iraq, we've had Afghanistan. We're messing around and inciting problems up in Ukraine. So I see no reason in the world for us to be involved in Syria. It's not our business. It got worse since 2011 because of a position Assad must go. Well, it looks like Assad isn't going to go, and there's going to be a lot bigger chance that there's going to be a conflict between Russia and the United States.
Dr. Paul, let me just take the opposite. If the U.S. does nothing, and I know you said you wish nobody were bombing Syria, which is obviously the humanitarian point of view, but here's what our national security analyst told us, KT McFarland.
Russians have just run the table, right? The Russians have just totally outsmarted and outfoxed Obama at every step. And it's a lot more than just, well, they were so much smarter, cleverer. The Russians are now in a position where they're going to take over the Middle East.
So to KT's point, Dr. Paul, what does this mean if the U.S. doesn't have a presence? Does that allow, as many have described Russia, just a bully to take over?
Well, there certainly is a challenge to us, but our presence in the Middle East and declaring that we're the dictators of the world and we have troops in 152 countries and we're always involved in regime change and they're backfiring, they're bankrupting us, and they end up helping ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they're helping Iran. I see that the policy is bad. It costs a lot of money, and we're involved in many, many other countries. If you ever look at the flags where we have military bases around the world, compared to those of Russia, you know, I don't think we have to worry that Russia's going to invade us. But right now, Russia has a lot to worry about us because we put sanctions on them, we badger them, and we threaten them. And now they're sick and tired of it, and they're confronting us. And they have an interest in Afghanistan. They have a treaty with Syria, and they have a base there, which is legal for them to have it. So I don't think it's anything unusual. I just think that we should stay out of inciting so many problems around the world. Bombs won't solve this problem, and we have precipitated some antagonism around the world that we don't need. The bombs didn't solve the problem in Iraq.
Dr. Paul, when you hear a candidate such as Donald Trump saying it's respect, we need to fight fire with fire, you disagree?
Well, I disagree that we fight fire with fire, but it ought to be with our brains. And yes, we contest those who compete with us. But to say because Russia does such a thing that we have to confront them, I think they're fighting fire with fire. We're the ones that are involved in their neighborhood. We're the ones who take NATO and put it up and surround their country right up to their borders. So they're fighting fire with fire. They're sticking back, and people are hysterical because because they're asserting themselves. I mean, we're the ones that decided that we'd put on the sanctions and do all these things. If we were a weaker nation and they did this to us, we would consider it outright aggression. So, yes, I think you fight fire with fire, but we ought to use our brains about doing it. We ought to confront them, you know, by setting good standards and trading with them and outperforming them. I mean, we didn't have to defeat the Soviet Union with weapons. We defeated them by outperforming them. We fought fire with fire. Economic policies, ours at that time were absolutely
we do have sanctions
better.
on now. But Dr. Paul, in looking at the candidates, I am assuming you have a big favorite for your son, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, but there are murmurs that he may soon drop out, that his rating, his polling is down to 3%. Is there any truth to this?
I haven't heard anything like that, and I talked to him just a couple of days ago, and there was no hint of that. I think his strategy is fine, and he's going to keep doing what he's doing. I think he's organizing young people in campuses, and they're the ones who are much more attuned to shrinking the government, being concerned about civil liberties and a foreign policy that gives us no chance to negotiate with people and too anxious for war. So he's the only one in the race that suggests, let's stop and think about this before we stir up the trouble and see if we can compete with who drops the most bombs. We've dropped enough bombs in the last 15 years. Thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people have died. Just last week, how many we kill in Afghanistan in a medical unit, and everybody is outraged about the deaths in this country.
Is absolutely outraged at your point, and as a doctor, you probably identify with that at even a deeper level than most people. I want to ask you, though, about the race, the presidential race, because you've done it 3 times. At this juncture, what is your advice to your son?
Keep doing what he's doing and speak the truth and speak it loud and clearly and stick to your principles, because that's what people want. They want to know the truth. And if you believe in liberty, present the cause for liberty. And that means something to a lot of people still. And once you talk about liberty and emphasize that, you exclude all the special interests and all the wheeling and dealing, because that is not liberty. That is special interest government. And that's why we're in this mess. And you talk to liberty not by groups, not go and say, I appeal to one group, I'm going to give you this, I'm going to give you this. You appeal to an individual, because liberty is individual, and you present the cause for liberty. Believe me, people will rally, and if they know you're telling the truth, they will vote for you.
Dr. Paul, there are many people who believe 100% in your ideas, but I'm going to say they are fearful living without a kind of infrastructure. I cover the markets. I'm obsessed with investment, so I always think of the Federal Reserve. Ben Bernanke, in his recent book, came out and said, you know why I am not a Republican anymore? He said that just constantly fighting, and he did actually call you out by name, constantly fighting the forces against the institution of the Fed, just to take the other side. Many people said after 2008, the entire global financial system would have gone down without the Fed. We need some infrastructure, right?
Well, it's still going to go down. He postponed it a little bit, but a lot of people went down. The middle class went down. The middle class is paying all the bills, and his friends got bailed out. So because he got a temporary reprieve for Wall Street, that doesn't satisfy me one bit. But the Federal
But he was
Reserve,
nominated by George W. Bush. So sometimes, and I know you take pleasure in being an outlier and you want to get your message across, but do you think sometimes if moving just a little bit to a larger tent would help some of your ideas become more adopted?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And this is why I get along very well with honest progressive Democrats who believe in civil liberties. They believe that we ought to have a different foreign policy. They believe in balanced budgets. They believe in looking at the Federal Reserve and treating people as individuals. So the coalition, the building, has to come with two groups that have principles that blend together. And that is the progressive Democrat and the libertarian constitutional Republicans, because we can't agree on so much. But if you sell out and say, well, I'm going to give you a little bit of this interventionism of conservatism and interventionism on the welfare state by the liberals and put that together, it's the worst system that we can have. And that's what we've been living with for a long time, because we have one single party pushing interventionism, planned economy, interference in our personal privacy, and a foreign policy of intervention. And it's all coming to an end because we can't afford it, and the Federal Reserve is not going to bail us out. They They got us in this trouble. They pretend they get us out of it, but they caused the trouble by fixing interest rates and interfering with the market. They're market manipulators and price fixer, and they have created the monster that we have, and it's on our doorstep, and it's not going away.
Well, one very smart person who is a big fan of yours, Jim Grant, cannot say enough good about your ideas. Dr. Paul, we thank you so much for the time. Glad to have you with us.